Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, November 8th, 2024, and today we are going to do the Feedback Friday thing, hear some life changes that actually worked, and talk about converting a rice paddy to vegetable production. Oh, and you'll get a little Friday field note for the road at the end. So let's do it. All right, so I hope everyone is having a nice start to their Friday. It is going to be 73 degrees Fahrenheit today, again, in November, which is like 22.7 degrees Celsius, or just t-shirt weather. That's good. That's universal. This warm weather has positives and negatives, but one of those positives is that we can still play plenty of soccer. So last night we got a bunch of kids together to let them play pickup at the park. In other countries and even just in other cities, pickup soccer just erupts in the streets or in a park or wherever they can find some space. But the challenge of sports in a rural area is that because we all live so far apart, the experience has to be manufactured to some extent. So I spend no small amount of time organizing get-togethers with the local parents so the kids can come out and have an opportunity to just play and enjoy the game. Again, soccer is my connection to the community, and I work to be intentional about that because community is important. As a farmer, as a person, community is resiliency, and plus the kids have fun. Anyway, it is Friday, so that means it's time to get some listener feedback from the week from you. You will remember some of the topics we discussed this week were leaves, farm labels, puzzles, letting cover crops run wild, and how we all got interested in farming. Of course, if you missed an episode, it is not a daily podcast in the sense that the information becomes irrelevant or outdated. I am in a way trying to bridge the gap between how-to content and daily content, so don't hesitate to go back and listen or watch old episodes. There are 29 of them as of today somehow. Amazingly. As always, I can't get to all the comments and respond to all of them, but I always try to read them, and I appreciate the time you all take to write them. Thank you, and I maintain that I have the smartest comment section on YouTube. So keep that up. I appreciate it. It's awesome. First, going back to Monday's episode about puzzling and letting cover crops run wild, this comment came in from at EMKN1479, who writes, quote, "I've heard the praises of tiller radish sung loudly, so I grew them last year. This year, I used field peas from the grocery store in a mix of deer food plot seeds that include grains, legumes, and brassicas. Then it occurred to me when I saw multiple cabbage butterflies flitting over the plot that perhaps I'm perpetuating my pest issues. Lots of harlequin bugs this year, too. Going forward, maybe I'll just focus on legumes and grains." End quote. It is definitely not impossible that you are increasing the populations of those pests for the next season by growing their favorite foods in your cover crop. Sometimes I suspect that the competition of a cover crop can make certain crops, certain species, vulnerable to more pest and disease pressure. One recommendation I often make, in fact, is to avoid crop families you rely heavily on for your cover crop mixes for fear of disease and pest issues. Harlequin beetles have been particularly voracious for us lately, but the reality is that so long as the brassica crop has adequate nutrition, generally just a good compost and consistent moisture does the trick, the harlequin beetles won't be as much of a problem. I also like to cover our brassicas until they are just well established to keep flea beetles off, but that allows them to get ready to fight off cabbage moths and harlequin beetles and all the rest. But perhaps switching away from brassicas in your mix, at least for a short time, is not the worst idea, just to limit those populations and break the cycle up a bit. Thanks for the question and comment. The next one comes from Marion Dunn 6580, who writes, quote, "I use organically grown to describe my produce. I don't just subscribe to any of the certifications. I'm just too small to justify the cost and time involved. Love that you're covering keeping fit over the winter. I'm working on it, hoping to maintain muscle without going into the gym. Thanks for the daily videos." Thanks, Marianne, and I appreciate the comment. Yeah, trying to stay fit over the winter is important. But this one was in regards to me talking about certifications and labels in Tuesday's episode, and I'm sure Marianne is aware, but just in case there are others who may not be, it is illegal to label produce for sale as organic if you are not certified. Obviously, if you are just a backyard grower and you call your own produce organic, no one is going to care. But as soon as you begin to sell it that way, the USDA can enforce expensive civil penalties for misusing the organic certification trademark. Do I think they would do that if you sold a little produce to some friends and called it organic? Probably not. But if you are set up somewhere or label your food that way, they technically legally can. So just be aware of that. I don't want any listeners to end up paying a fine for that. But thank you again for that comment. In regards to leaves being chopped up and added to compost piles in order to speed up the decomposition, on Wednesday's episode, that's what we discussed. At Red Hair Green Thumbs wrote on YouTube that smaller particulate matter is not always a good thing. Yes, it has more surface area for microbes, but doesn't provide good structure for the compost pile to stay aerobic, meaning like to give it room for oxygen. They say it can cause compaction in anaerobic conditions, especially in the center of a big pile. Just something to keep in mind, end quote. This is a good comment, and I agree that this is something to keep in mind. Extremely small soil particles is why clay compacts, for instance, so much easier than sand. Clay is significantly smaller per grain, and thus it will bind together readily and more easily create anaerobic tight pockets. It's good to have a slight mix in the leaves if possible. I find the mowing does a nice job of still leaving a lot of the leaf intact while also chopping up many of them down to a reasonable size. I also find that you really do have to water each layer extremely well, or the compacted leaves will prevent water penetration and air penetration. So yeah, don't over chop, I think, is a reasonable advice. Also, in terms of surface area, arguably the best comment of the week came from at kindhempco.6126, who wrote, quote, "More surface area is exactly the reason why waffles are better than pancakes." End quote. Hear, hear. Waffles for the win. Love that. Last little bit on feedback is that yesterday I put out a call to try and figure out why people who were watching the channel or listening to the podcast had found interest in our work in the last few years. My working theory is that there was a back to the land movement in the late 60s, early 70s, with a much smaller one during the recession times of the 80s. Then there was another large back to the land movement in the aughts that I was part of, which it seems like a lot of the followers are part of that period as well, and shouted out Barbara Kingsolver's book, Animal Vegetable Miracles, another source of inspiration on top of Omnivore's Dilemma. Anyway, in that chronology, we then arrive at COVID, where I think there was a similar back to the land movement, similar in size maybe to the one in the 80s, so like small but mighty. It seems, however, instead of back to the land, it seems that gardening, more than farming, has really exploded. So maybe in that way, perhaps tracking back to the land movements as simply people leaving cities to farm is less helpful than tracking movements of people to smaller towns with bigger yards who are effectively generating more of the food they eat. Anyway, all of that is interesting to me, and I think everyone who chimed in this week, I appreciate all of you. And up next, we're going to get hypothetical. Yeah, BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seeding to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. Their same-day shipping can help keep your planting schedules on track when the unexpected happens. They're here to help you grow good food. Turning to Johnny's means you can plant high-quality, trial-proven varieties with confidence and know that their expert staff is ready to help with first-hand knowledge, because they've grown them themselves. Learn more at johnnyseeds.com. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast and want to support it, you can do so at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions get to me, but so far I've not really had to because the Patreon page is just jamming. Today's question comes from Patreon member Colin Dieter, who writes, "Hey all, hypothetical for you, for sure not the exact situation I've found myself in." Colin writes, "I am in the process of acquiring some, let's call it heavily compacted land." Okay, purposely compacted. It was a group of 5 small rice paddies. Basically, there's about 15 centimeters, which is 6 inches of incredible topsoil, and under that is a 30 centimeters, so 1 foot thick clay layer that was pounded, steam-rolled, and otherwise compacted in order to retain water for wet rice production. It's like a massive swimming pool. The fields have been fallow for several years, and so they have wonderfully healthy soil, but man, that hard pan is something else entirely. Colin continues, Let's say I want to take this land and turn it from rice paddy to veg production. Others in my community have done this, but always with some pretty intensive deep tilling and subsoiling. In an ideal world, I would like to do this conversion without killing all that organic matter. Current plan is a one-time tilling event, mixing in rice husks and sand to improve drainage, but I would much prefer to not do this. This will be followed by a full year of cover cropping, starting with a daikon radish bred specifically to be used as cover crop for breaking up compaction commonly found in my area. It reaches about 50 centimeters deep and breaks down rather quickly after termination. After that, more cover cropping with grasses, and finally either a winter kill or winter hardy cover crop. Haven't decided on this one yet. What would you all do in this situation? For reference, Colin writes, I'm in the foothills of the Japanese Alps, most similar to USDA 7B. End quote. Thank you, Colin, for the fun and interesting question. I love these sort of hypotheticals, but also this one's not so much hypothetical as real-thetical. I don't know. I love it anyway. I'm sure regular listeners of the show or watchers of my channel know how I feel about being too gentle to the soil at times where heavy compaction is present, especially in an area where it was built to hold water. I personally see no way around physical intervention. I think my approach would look similar to what you described. However, I would probably add a good amount of compost, then do a subsoiling, then do that first tilling to break up the compaction and get as deep in there as possible. After that, I would raise the beds 12 inches or so to get as high above that residual compaction as possible. To be perfectly clear, this is just going to be a hard place to grow for a while. That's just a fact. But if you don't have a choice, which it sounds like you don't, I like the long cover cropping regimen as long as you really work at breaking up that compaction first. Honestly, there isn't a lot I would really change about what you described there. I would just say that when you intervene in the compaction, make it absolutely as worth it as possible. Get the best amendments you have access to worked in there. The rice hulls that you mentioned may also notably lock up the soil nitrogen, making it hard on those cover crops for a bit. So perhaps an activated biochar would be a better option if you have access to it. Anyway, great question, and I appreciate the fun situational thought experiment. Patreon member and horticulturalist Kyle Putnam also offered some good insight on that one on that October show thread. Keep them coming, Patreon members. I have to legit answer like 5 questions a week, so don't be shy. Just find that November show thread and get your questions in. Up next, our last segment for the week. Let's make it on life changes. Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to be in the field growing food for my community, not creating elaborate pack lists, not writing newsletters or responding to emails, not designing and maintaining web stores, and etc. And I especially don't enjoy doing those things after an already full and fulfilling day of growing food. Actually, if I spent less time on my phone and behind the computer, that would be great. If only there were a solution for that. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for farmers. With one single platform, Farmhand enables you to offload your administrative tasks, send and manage communications, and sell more to your customers. Farmhand saves growers an average of 6 hours of administrative load each week. That's 6 hours so you can get back into the field, spend more time with friends or family, or have a life outside of the farm, which is actually a thing. Think about it. What would you do with an extra 6 hours a week? Sign up for a free trial with the link in the show notes, because now is the best time to dial in those systems for the next growing season. Follow the Farmhand link in the show notes to learn more. All right, back to the show. One of the things that I keep thinking about as I carry on with this show, and I kind of seem to do this at the end of every week, is that if I had not quit drinking this summer, there would be no way I would be able to manage it. Not in any sort of healthy way, at least. I mentioned this in an earlier episode of the show, but I wasn't a heavy drinker anymore when I quit. I literally just couldn't be, even if I wanted to be. Physically, I was no longer having more than a couple beers without feeling like complete death the next day. The episode I did where I mentioned that was one on all the studies coming out about the negative effects of alcohol and its links to cancers and other negative health outcomes. I'll link that episode in the show notes in case you missed it. And to be clear, I'm not advocating anyone drink or not drink. I don't particularly care. That's entirely up to you. I think we sometimes forget that not everyone experiences the world the exact same way we do. There are plenty of people for whom a small amount of alcohol does not render them a walking brain fart, but I am not so lucky. Having spent the better part of my life drinking, though, I'm fascinated by this new world without alcohol. It's almost frustrating to wake up feeling perfectly fine and healthy every single day, something I feel like I'd missed out on for the last 25 years. It's weird to have consistent, cohesive thoughts. It makes me think about, I remember hearing this story about how Bob Dylan had quit smoking, and that's why he sounds so much different in Nashville Skyline. I mean, that album has some of my favorite vocal performances of all time, and you would never suspect them from Bob Dylan. Now, I'm not comparing Growers Daily to Nashville Skyline. This show is clearly more of his 2006 album, Modern Times. And I promise to never sing at you, at being probably the more appropriate preposition to use there, given my vocal abilities. Anyway, just saying that it would have been a different show had I still been drinking, if it would have been possible at all. Like, I may have already quit at this point. And I can't say I don't miss drinking sometimes, but I can say that I like not drinking a whole lot. So I'm curious for you all, what changes have you made in your life, either by necessity, like it was with me with alcohol, or by choice, that afterwards you sort of got to experience the world in an altogether new way, in an almost frustrating way, where I'm like, this is great. Anyway, I'm going to get a move on and enjoy this weather and weekend. I'll send you along with a Friday field note before I go, as is tradition. First, if you want to support our work, pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or a hat or other merch at no-tillgrowers.com. The super thanks button is always there for you, YouTube family, in case something I say strikes a poignant chord or helps with your garden or life or kids or soccer. Thank you to everyone who has been listening and engaging and subscribing and following, and especially and absolutely especially those who have signed up to be a Patreon member at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or if you just sign up in the month of November, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to, I always look forward to these lists. Let's find it. To Samantha Baker, James Allen, and Jana DeSanti. Jana DeSanti. That's a fun name. It's got like a bounciness to it. Like, it flows together really well. Makes me kind of want to put a D in the middle of my name, like Farmer to Jesse. That'd be awesome. It does flow together better that way. All right. Thanks you all for listening. I'll send you off with a Friday field note. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday. Bye. Okay, so I just have to say that I really dislike it when it's November and it's 75 degrees outside and it feels amazing every day, and I'm wearing a t-shirt and I'm getting work done, and it's very lovely. And also, all of the romaine that I planted for December and January is bolting. Like, it's really hard to square that, not gonna lie. Yep. Anyway, you all have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday. Bye.